record button here. All right, hello, I am Christy McKay from the Career Development Office. As we get started here, I'm going to ask all of our students and faculty to introduce themselves, and then we will move to the alumni to introduce themselves. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to call on you by first name, and then if you could please turn your video on, even if it's just briefly, to introduce yourself, and then you may turn it off if that is your preference. So first, I'm going to ask McCall to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm McCall. I'm a junior psychology major. I work as a student career specialist in career development, and I've been able to help Christy with inviting some of these panelists today to come and talk with us. So nice to meet you guys.
Awesome. Garrett, would you please go?
Yeah, my name is Garrett Crouch. I'm a senior math major, and I'm one of the students in Professor Lorenzen's data science seminar class. I'm excited to hear what Linfield grads are doing in that field.
Excellent. Casey?
Hi, sorry. I actually don't have a camera set up on this computer.
Okay.
But I'm Casey Lorniega. I'm a senior. I'm a computer science major here at Linfield. I'm also one of Lorenzen's students in the data science class because I'm going for the data science minor.
Great, thank you. Kenzie?
I'm Kenzie. I also work in the career development office with McCall and Christy, and I'm in Professor Lorenzen's data science seminar class. I'm a junior and a math major also, if that helps.
Great. Luis?
Hi, I'm Luis Rodriguez. I'm a computer science major, senior here at Linfield. I'm also in Professor Lorenzen's data science class. I'm going for the data science minor as well.
Excellent. Ryan?
I'm Ryan, and I am currently enrolled in the data science course.
All right, thank you. Yana, would you please introduce yourself? We can't hear you.
I'm on mute, and that's my
There we go.
introduction. I'm Yana Weisberg. I'm a professor in the psychology department. I also have a bachelor's degree in mathematics and just generally love statistics and data. And so I'm here to learn more about what's out there now in data science.
Excellent. Thanks for joining us. And Kate, would you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Kate Lorenzen. It's my first year in the math department, and I'm teaching the data science seminar.
All right, thank you all for being here. And now we're going to move on to our alumni introductions. And so I'm going to talk to each of you one at a time and ask you to introduce yourself, tell us what you majored in at Linfield, and then kind of walk us through your career to where you are today and in your current position. So Kira, would you please go first?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Kira Linke, mathematics major, class of 2007. You want me to start with the career now, or you're muted?
That happens once in every presentation, doesn't it?
Yep.
If you could go ahead and just walk through your career and then
Sure.
talk a little bit about what you're doing today.
Okay. So I actually, after graduating from Linfield, went straight to grad school, Michigan Tech, did my master's in mathematics as well. And from there, I taught for a few years at Howard Community College in Maryland and got recruited by the Department of Defense. I took a position, it was a software engineer, but it was really doing kind of prototyping. So figuring out how to implement some of the mathematical models, but since I had a little bit more of a background and done some programming classes than some of the mathematicians, kind of filling a gap in there. And I did that for 3 years. And then I took a position still with the DoD out in Hawaii as a digital network exploitation analyst. And spent 3 years out there. I started off taking a bunch of the same courses that the analysts took and learning about the problem set and the data. But then my position kind of migrated into using that computer science programming classes and I was also working on a master's in computer science at the same time and starting to participate in helping write tools for the analysts, but sitting with the analysts and actually doing it with them. So, at that time, data science wasn't as big a term as it is now. And so I was kind of stumbling into this data science role accidentally while the field was developing. So you had learning the data really well. If you know cyber, it's a whole different data set. It's got its own, there's lots of data, but then you have to learn it and understand what you're looking for. You have to have the subject matter expertise to be able to make sense of it. And then also be able to do some development, write some code for it. So it was exactly what I would define kind of data science to be now. So I finished up my tour in Hawaii after 3 years. And then I took, still with the Department of Defense, an assignment in North Carolina. I was actually working on NC State's campus as a data scientist and working with academics, trying to take classified problems, find similar unclassified problems and see how we could collaborate on solutions and then take it back into a classified space. And after that, we decided we liked North Carolina so much, we wanted to stay. So I looked for external jobs. Otherwise, my tour was wrapping up. And I got hired at IBM as a data specialist and doing some application development as well. So what we were trying to do at IBM was create a data lake. So combine all their different data sources that were similar into one big data lake to make it easier for people to pull data, write reports. We were working with data scientists as well, trying to get them access and help them learn the data and be able to come up with new insights into it. So I was on that project as well. I worked there for a little over 3 years, and then I got hired at the Applied Research Associates as their tech lead on a data science project, again, back in the cyber realm. You're on me again.
And that's what you're doing today, right?
That's what I'm doing today.
Okay, fantastic. And we'll have some more questions for you, but we're gonna move on and have the other alumni introduce. Kyle, would you please go next?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Kyle Urata. I'm a graduate from Linfield in 2015. I majored in mathematics. I had an education minor. I had every intention of becoming a math teacher. Well, I didn't have every intention, but I wanted to prepare myself to become a math teacher. I had student taught and everything. I did the whole student teaching experience, but I remember, teaching high school students math. I had the realization that I missed being in the seat rather than at the front of the classroom. And so I applied to grad schools, and I got my master's from Oregon State in statistics right after school. That was a really cool experience. Oregon State is such a big, large research institution, and there's a lot of people doing research, and there's a lot of people with data, and it's a really great place to talk about research and stuff. And so I got some consulting experience because a lot of students have data and not really sure what to do with it. And so in the statistics department, we did get consulting experience. And so that kind of led me to, after I graduated and defended, I got a job as a consultant at Pacific Source, as a data analyst consultant. And that was a 6-month contract, and I liked it there and they liked me. So they decided to hire me full-time after the 6 months. And today we're kind of working, I was promoted to the data science team maybe a year and a half ago, I believe. Now we work on things like developing member risk scores, if you guys don't know, Pacific Source is a health insurance company, and so they have headquarters down in Eugene, Oregon. So we work on things like risk scores, member risk scores, program evaluation, care program identification algorithms, all kinds of algorithms using the claims data that we receive. And yeah, I moved to Boise in 2019 after my partner got into the PhD program here at Boise State. And so luckily we have an office here in Boise, and I didn't have to find a job. Job hunting, while it's exciting experience, is not always the most fun. So I was glad to keep my job, and but that's what I currently do right now.
All right, thank you very much. And Michael, if you would please introduce yourself and walk us through your career.
Hi, my name is Michael. Let's say at Linfield, I played football for 4 years, and then I did a physics major, mathematics minor. Looking in retrospect, I wish I would have done computer science. That would have saved me a lot of like coding and learning on my own time in the future. So definitely recommend if you're doing some of the math, take some coding courses, because those really help and pay off dividends down the road, especially if you're getting into data science. After that, I also went to grad school. I was going to sell my soul to Wall Street. I got my master's in quantitative finance, was going to do like quant stuff on the banking side. Realized I didn't want to live in New York. I want to move back to the Pacific Northwest. So I ended up actually working at a company that was headquartered in New York, but based out in Portland, called M Science. They basically took traditional financial research and like alternative data and transformed that information, combined, like basically told a story on like the companies we were looking into, and sold our research to hedge funds and mutual funds. So a lot of data aggregation, some model predictions for quarterly revenues, things like that. And then after about a year after that, then I started working as a data scientist at Facebook on their integrity team. So Facebook's quite popular for like, if you ever watch The Social Dilemma on Netflix, they're about like getting people on the platform. We were kind of like the opposite side of the business, dealing with all the problems that sort of flourished on the platform. So I was on like drugs, firearms, sexual solicitation, prostitution. And the job of the data scientist is really like helping your project manager, your engineering manager, and your community operations teams kind of answer some of their questions, like how big these problems are on our platform. So kind of classic example I give is like, let's say we're police officer patrolling a neighborhood. We see 5 bad guys this week, 10 bad guys next week. That's 100% increase on our performance. We deserve a promotion. But then if there's 100,000 bad guys in the neighborhood we're patrolling, well, all of a sudden we're not doing a bad job. Now we're doing a bad job, and we probably should find someone else to do it. So sort of a lot of the data science work in that org was revolved around metrics and trying to help your business stakeholders understand those metrics, why they move, and maybe come up with some creative solutions on how to solve those issues. Let's see what else. And then I worked on another team at Facebook that dealt with like COVID related misinformation, built dashboards, did deep dives onto where the concentration of misinformation on Facebook was, whether it's like groups, pages, and profiles, and the different sizing of those issues. And so I did that for another year. And then most recently, I just started at Google this week as a product analyst for the ads team. So I unfortunately don't know much about what I'm doing yet, just kind of getting through onboarding right now. But yeah, we'll see. And to Kyle's point, yeah, interviewing is a real bitch. Sorry, I cussed there, but yeah, it's a lot of work. It's honestly like, especially smaller companies, what I found is interviewing smaller companies is typically a little less formal, so you don't know what you're going to get. Big companies, it's definitely like preparing for like a final exam at Linfield. You have to cover statistics, coding, communication, like cultural fit stuff, like previous experience, things like that. And some like more business product case study questions. So at big companies, there's definitely like a more range. There's like machine learning engineers, data engineers, and data scientists. And so there's a broad array of like different roles that you can fit in at larger companies. But at smaller companies, it tends to data scientists do more end-to-end, like they'll do like data warehousing all the way to communicating insights. So it all depends on what you're kind of looking for in your career.
All right, thank you. Next question for our alumni. How did Linfield prepare you for your current role? And I'm going to combine questions 2 and 3. Are there any specific courses or experiences that you had that made you really successful today?
Are we going the same order or jump in?
Yeah, go ahead and just jump in. If you're
Sure.
ready, please go.
All right. So one of the biggest things for me was working on a research project with, it was Professor Dunn that I worked with one summer. That was huge because, I mean, that was pretty real world. You know, you pick a problem, you're digging into it, this is what your focus is. It's new material, right? And then another one was I did a study abroad. At the time, it wasn't through Linfield, but the math faculty helped me find it because there weren't a ton of options for math study abroad back then. So I did Budapest semesters in mathematics, and it was a phenomenal program. Highly recommend. So I think those were two of the best experiences for me that helped prepare me.
Yeah, I think I first obtained a very strong interest in statistics from taking Prop Stats 1 and 2. Professor Hitchman was my professor in both of them. And I loved every minute of it. Right after that was probably the point where I thought I might want to go to grad school. So that was a huge moment for me. But I think teaching was really important to me too. The student teaching experience that I had, trying to get a secondary license, and also not Linfield related, but TAing in grad school as well. Those were all really important because, as Michael and Kira might attest, in enterprise analytics, you aren't always talking to people who know a lot about numbers and methods and all those sorts of things. So it's really good. Teaching is a really good way to learn how to level with people and try to speak the same language. And so those were two really important things for me.
I would say the small class sizes were one of the best parts of Linfield, and being able to really build a good relationship with your professor. I think I struggled a little bit academically during that time. So definitely having that one-on-one time to help cement a lot of the information was really helpful. Additionally, I leveraged the Career Center a lot to help prep my resume and LinkedIn. And I think that's probably, I'd say leveraging LinkedIn is one of the most crucial tools I've used in progressing my career and making connections with people. So definitely lean on your Career Center and making sure your resume and your LinkedIn are well, because that's how you get seen. That's how you get the interviews. At the end of the day, your degree is one thing, but if you don't have a good resume to sort of support your sort of experiences behind that, then you'll never get an interview, and at the end of the day, then you won't have a job. So yeah, I had this sort of premonition when I was at Linfield that I just need the degree and then someone will hire me. But the interviewing itself is a skill that's not as talked about as often, and so having good interview skills is what helps you land those first jobs and second jobs and get higher pay and whatever it is you're looking for in your career. So definitely lean on your Career Center as much as you can.
I would second the interview thing too, because I am terrible at interviewing, and I'm actually in the process of interviewing right now. So I realize that I do stink at it. So yes, I definitely use the Career Center.
Yeah. For reference, I interviewed at 80, or I applied to 80 companies between grad school and my first job, and I probably only got 10 interviews, and then from those 10 interviews, I only got one offer. So I just took the first one that I got, so definitely it's a tough process getting started, but once you kind of pick up the skills and develop some experience, it definitely starts to snowball from there.
And can you talk about the role that networking played in your career search and in your advancement?
So I know for some people, networking has played a major role. I know people who reached out to me to apply places because of networking. I didn't do that as much. I mean, I knew a couple of people at a few places I applied to, and it was great because I got to, one, they could put in a good word for me, but I got the real understanding what the company's like, what the company culture is, because one thing I think is key to remember when you're doing interviews is it's a two-way interview. You're interviewing them as well. And so I would really stress that just make sure that it's a good fit for you too, because interviewing is I think it's kind of a little bit fun, but it's stressful, and you don't want to be doing it again in 3 months because you didn't do your due diligence, because you were just trying to get them to hire you, and you didn't worry as much about the fit the other way. So I like using my networking for that kind of stuff too, is to like kind of scope out what's the real story on company culture. Are people overall happy there? Because every company's putting their best foot forward too. They're trying to sell you too. And then LinkedIn is huge. Use LinkedIn, use it well.
Yeah, I would also, on top of the interviewing things, I'm also not great at networking. I'm just not great at promoting myself, quite honest. It's one of my fatal flaws. But I think that there's one theme that I've always seen, and it's like, I've had friends in grad school who've gotten internships at big companies, and I've seen the success that they've had, and a lot of it has to do with when they have the opportunity, they make a great impression. They leave a great impression. They leave good thoughts. And I think that's a pretty common. I think that's a pretty common theme. So whether it's like, you get your first internship, you leave a good first impression, you're really well off to get in that first job. If you take that cup of coffee, grab that cup of coffee with somebody that someone sets you up with, leave a good first impression. I think that's the biggest thing to keep in mind, is that don't make an ass out of yourself, I guess, wherever you go and wherever you have the opportunity.
For me, my biggest networking has been through my colleagues, like either at Linfield or previous companies. So for example, the job at Google I just got, I only got an interview. I would say I probably only got an interview because of one of my colleagues from Linfield who works there now. And so he was able to submit a referral on my behalf. And that definitely probably helped open the door significantly. Another colleague I had from Linfield had a job, like a contract job at Facebook, and was able to connect me there. And so once those connections, those network, are able to get your foot, like at least to the interview part, then it's on you to like sell yourself. And basically like an interview is a sales pitch. You're trying to convince them why you're the best fit for this role and helping them solve their business needs, and why your skills align with their business needs. Additionally, like I've made connections through drinking a beer. I was in Bend one time drinking beer. This was before, like I was still in grad school. I didn't have any relevant internship experience. Didn't have any really experience at all. And I was just telling him like, hey, this is what I want to do. This is what I'm looking for. And then he responded pretty positively to that. He was just like, yeah, I work in wealth management and finance. I know you're trying to get in the financial industry. Let me talk to some people and see what we have. And so then I was able to become like an office assistant. So obviously not very data driven, just answering phone calls and making coffee. But that was my way to break into the financial industry, was through something that maybe wasn't as career related as I want to, but ended up paying down the road because I was able to then get my job in fintech doing like alternative data research. So you never know like what opportunities are going to come from different conversations, but just like be passionate about what you do. And, just when you talk, oh, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm interested in doing, and let those conversations kind of like guide you.
All right, I am going to stop asking questions and let others pipe in with some questions. So if you have one, please go ahead and unmute yourself and ask our panelists.
I've got one to start. So I guess this is kind of for all three of you guys. What's the best way to say this? In what ways do you kind of like implement things related to data science, say in like your daily careers or your every day-to-day job?
Sure. So different jobs, I've done different things. I've worked on recommender efforts. I've used decision trees, done some different modeling techniques. Definitely a lot with harnessing big data and like sanitizing, cleansing it, and validating it.
Yeah, I would say it's I wouldn't say it's like every minute of every hour I spend working on a model, especially in healthcare, where in healthcare we have a lot of regulatory entities who are interested in what we're doing, and my boss likes to call it keeping the plane flying. So that there's a lot of that, but I would say that, like, once an enterprise model is in place and it's in production and it's running and it's working, the next effort is to keep it running. And so that means getting more data, getting better data, cleaning up whatever mess it's making. But I think it's, I would say 10% of my work, 20% of my work is actually working on something new. It's more keeping the things that are running working.
I'm much like my work hasn't been as like algorithm involved, like building machine learning models. I've done like 2 my whole career. Most of my time, or most of like the data analytics we do, is like really trying to think about how the data relates back to the business. And so like we start with this question, like, okay, what is our problem? What data do we have access to? And kind of filling in the blanks. So like as a data scientist at like Facebook, it was really about like being the custodian of the data and trying to tell a story behind what we're seeing. And yes, like a lot of that work is understand the data, pre-processing it, and making sure you understand like the little caveats in the data. So a lot of it's just like making sure your charts like tell the right story behind it, or that, when you look at your distribution, you can explain that to a non-technical person. Let's say we have, a right skewed normal distribution, like, okay, well, we only care about the far right tail to it. So, and being able to explain like, okay, how does that relate back to what our business decision is we're trying to make here, or whatever. Or maybe instead of using a distribution, you look at the cumulative distribution chart, So I'd say like a lot of like what I do is just making sure you're telling the right story with the data, and that your priorities are aligned with what the business objectives are.
Awesome. Thank you.
I have like a question for Michael, but anyone can chime in as well if they feel like they can answer it. I was reading your LinkedIn a little bit, and you said that at Facebook you work to leverage big data and like preventing real world harm in social media. And I was just kind of curious on what that kind of real world harm is, at least from the Facebook perspective, that like you guys were trying to stop through your big data analysis.
So, so real world harm. So like I worked on like our greater team was called dangerous content. Dangerous content meant anything where like our users could be harmed from those in like a very real way. So think like I worked with data science who worked on terrorism. I worked with a data scientist who worked on like sexual, or it was like child pornography and things like that. So we want to prevent those things from actually happening. So for example, like illicit trade dealt with buying and selling illegal goods. So before I joined, I remember there was like a really bad incident that happened where a high schooler was able to buy a gun off Facebook and then like shoot up his school or something like that. And so like those are kind of the real world events we are trying to prevent. And so back to what I was getting at with like the metrics. So we want to look at like some different metrics. So like making sure that, the number of content we're taking down is going up. And for example, one of the main metrics we think about is like prevalence. So what is the percentage of content that we're seeing that is violating based on our policies over the total amount of content that's like potentially on our platform? And so we do that. So let's say we want to measure all the stuff on Facebook. Well, there are billions of posts on Facebook. It would be impossible for us to look at every single one a day. So we use sampling statistics in this case. So you can use random sampling, satisfied sampling. You can stratify it against classifiers, and then you look at your labeler's position and a bunch of different stuff. And so basically we want to think about like false positives in our enforcement. So things that we're taking down that we shouldn't. And then we want to think about false negatives. So things that we're missing that we should be taking down. And so it becomes kind of this game of like cat and mouse with like people changing their strategies on how to avoid our detection, things like that. So that's sort of like the real world harm and impact that we were trying to get at Facebook. And while the media doesn't necessarily think we're doing a great job, we try our best with the resources that we have. Like I said, we only have like so many resources and piece of content we can look at a day. So we try and rely on some automation, but when you automate things, you then start having error. And so when you automate things at scale, then you start taking down a bunch of stuff. I remember one time we were taking down stuff that was like, had the word weed or something in it, and it ended up just being a group that was posting like Animal Crossing, and they were like buying and selling like weed or something on their video game, but our systems were taking it down. So that'd be a case of a false positive, where we're taking down something that we shouldn't, because it was just a drug that people were buying and selling in a video game. It wasn't real world harm.
Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me? I moved location, so I'm not sure. My question, I guess it comes from something Michael said, but I think it's relevant to everybody, which is about like coding skills. So say you're a senior and you don't have time in your schedule to start taking computer science or start taking coding. What should you do? Like, does coding language make a difference? If so, what language would be best? Kira mentioned data cleaning and sanitizing. I mean, you need to know some coding for that too, I would assume. And also, Kyle, your expertise in statistics, like what kinds of statistics would you recommend people learn more about?
For data science, I would start with Python. That would be my recommendation.
Yeah, I agree with that as well.
Yeah, I would just start. I mean, I know it's hard. I did a computer science degree while I was working full time. Just to play catch up. But Python's actually really easy, intuitive to learn. It's not bad. And I would just start to use things. You can use things like HackerRank's great for quick, short exercises. I liked that. It was kind of helpful for getting started. Of course, there's like lots of other options too. But if you need shorter, like you can't commit to a class per se, something like that is good for an introduction to help prepare you for a class. So maybe it's not as big of a learning curve.
Yeah, I would second Python. I'm a big R junkie, so I refuse to use Python in most cases. I find that they're pretty replaceable. They're fairly intuitive. They pretty much do the same things. I just like R. I'm just addicted to it. I agree with the HackerRank thing. I'm studying for a technical interview right now. I'm using HackerRank to try to brush up on Python. I would say like R Python. I think one advice I would have is I always learn about the new things people are asking for by looking at job listings. Go look at a job listing for a senior data scientist and figure out what they're looking for. Companies like Micron, they want you to know Java. I'm not really sure why, but they do. C# sometimes. But I would say Python is probably a must. And if you're really interested, go look at the job listings and figure out what like they're expecting people to know.
I've also had 2 interviews where there were HackerRank assessments, so it's also not a bad idea to start familiarizing too.
Let's see. Yeah, so I used Python in my first job and when I was working in fintech, but since I've been at like Facebook and probably Google, predominantly all my work's been in SQL. But that's a little bit harder to practice like on your own. They're not as easily accessible, but definitely like SQL is the easiest language to learn for like data transformation, stuff like that. Python's definitely one of the better tools. In terms of statistical skills, like that's a tough question to ask because it depends on any company or any team you work for and what their business objectives are. Like I just got done interviewing at LinkedIn. They wanted time series forecasting and optimization. I'd never done that before, so I just had to learn some stuff prior to the interview. Whereas Google was more interested in like probability, some classical machine learning stuff, and then some basic like exploratory statistics and like how to think about like distributions and whatnot. So I would say it really depends on what you're going to do. And like we said, like data science is such a broad field. You can be a data engineer, which is like what Kira was talking about with the data lakes and data warehousing, or you're like more of like a data scientist or a machine learning engineer where you're implementing like models and things of that nature, or just really trying to help connect the data to the business insight. So both those skills are very data driven, but they require completely different sets of technical skills and statistics behind them.
Yeah, I realized I forgot to answer the statistical question. I would just say like I feel like most times you're going to run into somebody who wants you to run some sort of regression. Learn about the different types of regression techniques, learn about the assumptions that are needed for each of them, what kind of data you would use for each one. I mean, learning about probability models and simulation is probably a good one to learn as well. And if you're that kind of person, learn about Bayesian. I am not a Bayesian, but learn about it.
Bayesian,
Like
Monte Carlo,
Yep.
and knowing what to use when is critical.
I've been quizzed a lot in interviews just on like the end-to-end like machine learning cycle. So like what data would you want? Like they said, like what variables would you want to go in to predict why? How you kind of pre-process, how you select your different variables for your model so you're not overfitting or underfitting. Like they said, the assumptions of the different regression models. You know, you have random forest, you have just your logistic regression, just a basic linear regression, like which model would you choose and why? And then your evaluation metrics, like after you run your model and you fit it, like how do you know if your model is performing good? So really like the end-to-end understanding of like how to develop these models comes up in a lot of like these data science interviews. And then also like I've been quizzed just like at some of these companies, just very high level statistics, like how would you describe a normal distribution to someone? How would you describe confidence intervals? What are some different sampling statistic methods? Just very like basically like your statistics 101 high level. You know, they might not ask you like how do you calculate constant intervals, but like knowing how to communicate that to a non-technical person is what's going to help you just have like a good understanding of what you're doing and help you progress your career moving forward.
Any other questions out there from students?
I've got one more. This is just kind of a curiosity. First, like kind of how you said, explaining this kind of like data science stuff to people who aren't as familiar with that. I guess for all three of you, how often does that come up like in your day-to-day cycle?
I can go first. As someone who runs certain projects pretty much every day, every day, if not weekly, you know, we're always meeting with people outside the company. I would, you know, the thing is that like we don't do all of the data science stuff for ourselves. We don't do it for fun. So we do it because to support a business and people who work in it. So I think that, yeah, it's super important. And you know, depending on who you are and whether or not you're leading a team or not, you probably do it more often than you'd like. So.
Could you repeat the question? I got distracted when you said it.
Yeah, sorry. It was basically like about percentage wise during the day, like where you are specifically, how often are you like describing differently to somebody who doesn't quite understand data science versus describing to somebody who is understanding of this?
I would say, I don't know, probably because most of your stakeholders are like PMs or it could be a director. Sometimes they are technical. Sometimes they work their way up to that position. Sometimes they are a non-technical person. So it really depends on your company and team. Back to that sort of cheap excuse. But I would say probably 60-40. I mean, if I had to throw a number out, 60% of the time you're explaining to someone who's non-technical, and 40% of the time you're working with either your engineers or people who are deep in the data with you. And the other percent of the time you're like aligning on priorities or making sure like what you're working on aligns with the business needs. So I would probably say like 60-40 if I had to throw out a guess.
I'm gonna agree with Michael, and it depends a lot on where you're working, and I've worked for quite a few different places, so I can definitely speak to that. My current job, I don't have to do it all the time. My PI, my primary investigator, is a mathematician, so and a very involved one, and he's the one who does most of the customer engagements. So he's doing a lot more than I am. Sometimes I'll help out, and like right now he's on a trip, so I'm filling in all those meetings. So it's a lot more this week than I'd like. But my last job with IBM, I was doing it significantly more because I was working with more business analysts and I was speaking directly to them for the most part. So it really depends on the company and the role that you're in.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to put out one last call for questions.
What are your favorite things about the places you work with, or the job that you have right now?
Once upon a time when the offices were open, we got free breakfast, lunch, and dinner. That was pretty awesome. But I miss it.
So I really like the company I've been working for the last 5 months. I mean, I've liked all the places I've worked. I've been on great teams. But the one I'm in right now, research is in the name. So I feel like I get to do a lot more exciting kind of new work sometimes. I mean, you still have to do a lot of cleansing and a lot of preparation, but I feel like I'm more on the cutting edge side of things. So it's just more fun for me personally. That does also mean that more of your stuff tends to be less unsuccessful and has to get thrown out when you're in research, but that's okay to me.
I always kind of joke around that the best place about the place that I work is that I don't hate any of my coworkers. I think that's kind of key. I actually enjoy the people I work with. I guess the other thing that I really like about where I work is that the work is really important. So I like Michael and Kira would say, like, we know what we do is important, and it's driving, it's motivating. So
yeah, I think having like a manager that supports you and that you get along with is really critical for not only like you wanting to show up to work and do the work every day, but also like your professional growth. Having a manager that like has your back and is like willing to like go out of his way to like help you grow is really important, especially at early stages in your career. And in addition, like being passionate about the work you do. If I would say at Facebook, my work was pretty interesting, but it was really challenging. The fight against crime never stopped. So it was also like very exhausting and definitely felt a little bit burnt out after a while. Well, Google Ads, we'll see if that's kind of interesting, but it should be pretty fun. I guess I have a question for everyone else. Like, what are you guys most interested in the aspect of data science? And that way we can maybe answer like some of your like, oh, I'm interested in this, and we can like talk to some of those points a little bit.
Say at least. I know for me, like kind of how you've touched on working with Facebook and trying to prevent crime, that's where I'm most interested in, is like collecting of data and using it to apply to real world scenarios and what we can do to change certain things about it. So yeah, you've kind of already covered most of the stuff I'm interested in.
So I mean, a lot of like social media companies like have like integrity or like trust and safety departments. So Google has one, LinkedIn has one, Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, like every big tech company has a sort of like integrity, like fraudulent departments. And then there's also like in finance, they have like fraud where you're building like fraud models and things like that, or trying to detect like credit card fraud in their system. So that could be a really interesting avenue for you. And what I'd recommend is like going on LinkedIn, looking up those jobs and seeing what skills they want, how much experience they want, and what sort of like statistics and modeling they want behind that. And then just go start YouTubing it, Googling different blogs and like how to build those models. Like Medium is a good one for reading about data science stuff. Towards data science is always good. And that's kind of how I started. I didn't know what I wanted to do, whether it's data engineering, machine learning engineer, data science. I just started like reading and learning as much as possible. And then finally just like let that experience just kind of guide me to wherever I ended up.
And the comment that was just put out there, NSA, really interesting problems there. You can do some cyber defense stuff and it's a growing field right now, right? Like it's huge right now. There's a lot of exciting work being done. So I'd second the comment that was put out there on NSA too.
Awesome, thank you.
And they'll they'll pay and let you do classes too, additional coursework.
That's another thing I'd say. Like, I wish I would have worked instead of gone straight to. I wish I would have worked and gone to grad school kind of like simultaneously. But that was that's something I wish I would have done. That way I could get work experience and then maybe and get and pay for that with my job rather than take out student loans. But that's just more of like a financial decision thing than a data science thing. But that's my recommendation. People work and go to grad school.
I will say it's hard.
Yeah, I don't wish that on myself.
Yeah, I did it. I've done both ways, and it was definitely easier focusing on being a student. But that being said, I mean, I didn't have to deal with student loans and stuff. But it was really, really hard working full time. And some of them have like the Department of Defense, I will say, like, so I started off the program doing one class a semester in my free time. But when I got close to wrapping up, they let me do a program called 2020, where you work 20 hours and you go to school part-time, and they still give you your full salary, and you just sign like a contract. So it's feasible, and there are things in place at different companies. DoD wasn't the only one who has that in place, other companies do too. But doing it both is still really hard. I mean, I was still doing over just a full-time job either way.
Yeah, I would say if anybody is passionate about going to grad school but like wants to go into the workforce first, I would think about asking, inquiring of the companies that you're interviewing with and seeing how they'll support you and imagining yourself doing that sort of thing.
And also don't do it right after starting a job. Give yourself time to settle and learn your job and get good at your job before starting it.
Yeah.
All right, it looks like we're almost out of time here. I'd like to hear a final words of advice from each of you alumni about how our students, what can help them get into a career in data science.
So for me, my biggest advice is like, try to get reasonably good at programming and having a handle on the math side of things. Personally, I don't think it's a bad idea. They have some really good kind of basic level visualization classes as well, that I think helps, because even if you're not going to do it in production, it still helps you present your work and get the big ideas across in a meaningful way, which makes your work more valued. So you can do the exact same work, but if you present it one way, it may get tossed out. But if you can explain why it's meaningful, valuable, impactful, and visualization is a pretty helpful tool in that, where a lot of people like to see graphs and charts that make sense to them. So I would recommend doing a few of those courses. That would be my big suggestion, just for making yourself making your work a little more presentable to the common audience.
Yeah, data visualization is a big one. I'll second that one. But I would also say that 90% of the visualizations I make don't see anybody else's eyes but my own. They're for me mostly, and those are really helpful when you're doing, modeling or doing machine learning or any of those sorts of things. I would second also learn how to program, be comfortable with code. And I wouldn't say that grad school is necessary. All three of us went to grad school. I wouldn't say it's super necessary. You're going to, if you get into data science, you're going to encounter a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds. A lot of backgrounds make their way into data science now. It's not just statisticians and mathematicians. There's a lot of different kinds of people in data science. And so I wouldn't say that grad school is necessary, but it definitely doesn't hurt. So I would think about it, but you think about what you want to do most. It's not super necessary.
I know some places have, or some people do like the boot camps, the 6-month like data science boot camps. I don't know the value behind those, but definitely like that could be an alternative route to grad school. I know some of those boot camps have like career placement and development teams as well. What was the question? I totally forgot. Anyways, so I just listed a link that I used when I was like starting out. I didn't, like I said, I graduated grad school. I didn't know Python or R or any of that stuff. So I had to teach a lot of that to myself. I use, like they said, HackerRank, YouTube, and then I use this website called Kaggle. Kaggle has like online data sets that you can use. There's code. So I sent you like the code section where you can literally just like look at other people's code and how they've either done different models or stuff like that. And you can look at different kinds of stuff like that. So that's where I got like a lot like sample code, and then I would take some of the data sets and practice on my own. And so practice is what's going to help you get there. And Kaggle is one of the places you can make it's kind of like a GitHub or like a LinkedIn for coding. Basically, like create an account, you can then work with some data sets, and then I've actually sometimes linked that into my like resume or my application. They can see my Kaggle, and if they're going to take the time to look at it, they'll be like, oh wow, this guy can code. So that could be another avenue, sort of like build a portfolio of projects, even if you don't have relevant like experience. Like I didn't have relevant data science or analytical internships. I kind of came out of grad school with nothing. So I really had to find a way to separate myself from everyone else, and doing, projects on my own, attending, well, pre-COVID, I attend some like data science, like seminars in Portland, just to try and meet people, get some relevant practice. And that was one way I did it. So whatever, you just have to think about how can you separate yourself as an individual from the other candidates you're going up against, because it is a very competitive market.
All right, well, I want to thank each of you for giving us an hour of your time to talk about your careers. If it's okay with you, I would like to share your emails with this small group of students. So if they have other specific questions, they can reach out to you. I will confirm that with each of you before I actually share that. But thank you very much for joining us. It was fascinating to hear about the different organizations and projects and advice.